government fails, the world's off its rails, leaders are whacked, democracy is under attack. It's time to get smart, folks, time to get real. Let's cut through the crap, tell us how you feel. Let's cue the talent, let's meet the host. Podcast by George.
Well, hello, hi, how are you? Welcome on in to another podcast by George. That intro that you see a lot of times on there, I got to mention people that help with this podcast. That's Bob Pace that wrote that jingle and plays and sings on that. And we want to thank all of our great announcers that also introduced the show. John Schaefer. You also get to hear Ron Placone at times doing his song there at the beginning. And then, of course, we've got the podcast by George singers that are doing kind of the Placone version, a couple of young daughters of a podcast by George viewer. And you get to see all of that stuff. This artwork over my right shoulder. A lot of people see that and comment about it. That's Carol Hartman. She's out in Montana, and you can get her artwork by just Googling Carol Hartman artwork. So, I like to, recommend people. I like to recognize them, particularly for the help that they do with the show. And this is a good time to do that because we're live. This is a special live edition of Podcast by George. We're going to be talking Afghanistan. I mean, it's all over the news. Everybody's seeing it, but we've got one of the most expert, insightful perspectives on it because of our guest. And it's Matthew Ho, who's a friend of Podcast by George. You've seen him on the show before. We've talked about Afghanistan a lot. This train has been coming down the track. We've seen it coming, and here it is on the scene, and it is an ugly mess indeed. And for folks that might need a reminder, Matthew Ho has over 12 years experience with America's wars overseas with the United States Marine Corps, the Department of Defense and State Department. Prior to his assignment in Afghanistan, Matthew took part in the American occupation of Iraq, first in 2004-05, and then in 06-07 in Anbar province as a Marine Corps company commander. Afghanistan and Iraq war policy and operation issues at the Pentagon and State Department. That was what he was doing from 02 to 08. Matthew has been a senior fellow with the Center for International Policy since 2010. In 2009, Matthew Ho resigned in protest from his post in Afghanistan over the American escalation of the war. And, I think he saw this coming, and I think that's what was behind that. And we're going to find out right now. Let's bring him in and see if I can get this to work. Matt, are you there? Let's see here. Add to the stream. There we go. There he comes in. Yeah. Hi, pal. How you doing?
Good, George. Thanks for having me on. I think this is the first time I've ever done like a live stream before. So
yeah, this is the Podcast by George live line is what I call it. And, I wanted to entitle this particular episode, Pentagon Politicians, Profiteers, and Poppies. And we'll talk about that a little bit. And the question that I always ask on the show, Matt, you've heard me say before, when it comes to our elected officials, the warmongers, the military industrial complex, are they too dumb or are they in on it? And the cost, the toll in human lives is staggering. I'm going to bring this up on screen here, real quick, a little chart to look at. See if I can get this to come up. Okay, this is thousands of civilians in Afghanistan and Pakistan that have died in the conflict from 2001 to 21. Now, each one of these little dots represents 1,000 people, folks, dead and in the ground. U.S. and allied troops killed 3,586. Military and police, 75,971. Civilians, 78,314. Opposition fighters, including Taliban, 84,191. And like I said, it's staggering, particularly when you consider that everybody's in agreement now that we didn't do any good in Afghanistan. And in fact, we did a lot of harm, including putting these people on the ground. The first question that I have for you, Matt, is actually on this chart. Opposition fighters, including Taliban, and then they have the civilian column also. But wouldn't you say there's a lot of crossover in those two columns, and the military and police also?
Absolutely. one of the issues is, first of all, no one was keeping track of any of these casualties, the Afghan casualties, until 2009. I mean, there was literally no effort to keep track of casualties before then. So anything that happened before 2009 is complete guesswork. And the other thing, too, is that everyone who puts out these numbers, mostly the numbers come from the United Nations, but some other organizations do it as well. They will say very firmly, these are the low end estimate. This is the rock bottom baseline estimate. So when you see 78,000 civilian dead, that is the minimum amount killed. There's a number of reasons for that. But, to give you an example of how many more probably have been killed, British author, a guy named Jonathan Steele, wrote a terrific book about Afghanistan about 10 years ago. He's been a long-time war correspondent, a lot of time in Afghanistan. He was there for, throughout for the years in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and then with the American invasion and occupation began in 2001, Steele was there as well. Steele makes a very coherent and well-documented argument that just in the first 3 or 4 months of the U.S. invasion in 2001, 100,000 Afghans died. A lot of those are what we call excess deaths, right? People who died because the society shut down because of the war. And so deaths that would not have ordinarily occurred. But also a lot of those were also killed because we had massive airstrikes in Afghanistan. B-52s dropping, what were affectionately called daisy cutter bombs in valleys, wiping out entire villages in that first year of the war, those first few months of the war. So how many people have actually been killed, we have no idea. And some of it is because there hasn't been a functioning government or a government that people trust to go to and say, my family was killed, my son was killed. There have been other aspects about you're talking about a rural conservative society that buries its dead quite quickly. And also a society that has been at war, has been suffering for many decades. And so there doesn't seem to be an impetus in some elements of Afghan society to report these deaths or to go to the authorities. And quite possibly the authorities may be on the other side of the conflict. The Afghan government may be on the other side of the conflict. I'll also tell you that from my experience, both in Iraq and Afghanistan, that for every U.S. airstrike, errant missile, errant mortar shell, firefight, et cetera, that killed civilians, there were probably 4 or 5 others that did not get reported, at least. Right. So, I mean, the numbers are, when you see those numbers, you have to take them as this is the bare minimum. And we may never really know how many have died, let alone the number. I mean, I think we have a better handle on the number of refugees. But, what about other things in sense of wounds, injuries, mental health effects? You've got an entire nation traumatized by 4 decades of war.
Yeah.
And there's other aspects to this as well. The economic aspects. 70% of Afghans live on less than $1 a day. I mean, so you're talking about a subsistence or sustainment society. So there are public health issues that come with a society that is that poor, that lives in a country with no infrastructure, no employment, no industry, other than the poppies that you brought up earlier. And the drug abuse that has occurred there as a result of those poppies. I saw something recently that 1 in 3 Afghan families are affected by addiction issues. 1 in 3.
Wow.
I mean, that's all tied into this war. That's all a consequence of the war. So the destruction of the war is much more than simply the bodies in the ground. The point about the enemy fighters, it's interesting to see that 85,000 number, because up until just a handful of years ago, the United States swore there was no more than 25,000 Taliban members total. But now it's being reported we've killed 85,000. So, I mean, it kind of, that gets into more also as well, the issues about accurate reporting on the war. And what have our government been telling us in all these years that the generals have been saying, the Taliban they're on the run, just give us some more time, maybe some more troops even, but just some more time, we're making progress. The Taliban is being defeated and victory is around the corner. And, the great lie of that sustained the war.
Well, And I wanted to get into that also, but I also had to ask you a question about that chart. They're reporting numbers, Afghanistan and Pakistan. What would be the reason for combining the casualties for those two countries?
I don't, I mean, you can, I think the conflict is intertwined in a way, but I don't know why they would intertwine it like that. That really obfuscates things. That makes it difficult to understand the very real effects. Plus, they do this, whether it be the US government or the media, does this thing where they conflate the Afghan and Pakistani Taliban, which is a really, really a poor thing to do. I mean, that is just a mistake. That is incorrect. The Afghan Taliban are not the Pakistan Taliban and vice versa. I mean, just for the simple fact that the Afghan Taliban was receiving support from the Pakistani government while the Pakistani Taliban was trying to overthrow that Pakistani government. So just if you knew that basic level of information, you would know just because they're Pashtun, just because they call themselves Taliban does not mean that they are the same organization. But yeah, no, that is bewildering why they would put the two countries mixed in there together. And I think that, I don't know much more about it than that, other than I would say that I think that is a pretty good explanation of the laziness, the disregard, the, kind of the racism that is involved in the U.S. understanding of these wars. Oh, they're all the same. Put them in the same column. Pakistanis, Afghans, what's the difference? Put them in the same column. I mean, that's kind of the attitude I get. And I've seen that attitude, throughout the U.S. military, throughout the U.S. government, and in the U.S. media.
Well, that's not an exaggeration, overstatement. That's not outrageous what Matt is saying, because the Pentagon Papers that I mentioned in the Washington Post, I mean, there are Defense Department officials, high-ranking people, a 3-star general, I think, that said basically, we didn't know what the hell we were doing. We didn't know who the enemy was. We didn't know who our friends were over there. I want to have you now you're the expert on this, and I'm just a, podcast by George guy here, Matt. Let me see if I've got any of this timeline and circumstances right. This is the way that I think of Afghanistan. We have 9/11. Everybody gives George Bush carte blanche to go and do something about 9/11. We chase Al-Qaeda, we think, into Afghanistan. We have success controlling, dominating Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan very quickly, actually. But for some reason, probably nation building, we stay. And I heard you say that in, I don't know, like maybe 08 or 09, something like that, the Taliban, they actually wanted to negotiate. They wanted to sit down and talk to us. I mean, they wanted to resolve this, but because we were in the midst of a surge, and because of all the bullshit that was coming out of the Pentagon about how we were going to win this militarily, we decided to take the military track instead of the negotiated settlement track. And we have been doing that up until the present day. And what we are witnessing, what we're experiencing, which we should know about because we went through it in Vietnam, is a military defeat. And what that exodus looks like, including helicopters pulling people out of the embassy in the capital city. Have I got any of that right?
It's mostly right. I mean, it's always hard to pick a start date, right? A start date for the war and everything. I think, you have to understand Afghanistan as a living legacy of the Cold War. This war begins in the 1970s. The U.S. actually starts funding the Islamist rebel groups, the Mujahideen, 6 months before the Soviet Union invades. The idea behind that was a plan to cause problems in Afghanistan to the point that the Soviet Union would have to intervene. The idea to bait them into a trap, to lure them into invading. And as Zbigniew Brzezinski, Jimmy Carter's national security advisor, said, give the Soviet Union their own Vietnam. And this, and so you understand that the role the United States has played in Afghanistan. I think most American commentators would say, well, the United States was minding its own business, being a good citizen of the world, saw that the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan and went over to try and help out. Or they would say, well, the Soviet Union invaded, so we were locked in this Cold War, so it made sense to have this proxy war there. But we had to keep the Soviets from spreading. And then, of course, you always had the great lies coming out of the Carter and Reagan administration engineered by Zbigniew Brzezinski, that the Soviets were invading Afghanistan because they wanted a warm water port in the Persian Gulf. And after the Soviets took Afghanistan, they were going to roll down south and west into Iran and take over Iran. And then they would have a presence in the Persian Gulf. And, all this stuff that was manufactured, lies, fabrications, issued by the very people who created these policies, who the whole idea was to get the Soviet Union into Afghanistan, give them their own Vietnam. But more importantly, because if you remember the time period, 1978, 1979, there was all type of uprisings, violence, coups, takeovers throughout the Persian Gulf and in greater Middle East area. You had it occur in Pakistan. You had it occur in Saudi Arabia. So the idea, and of course Iran. So the idea is that not only we're going to bait the Soviet Union in, but we're going to cause so much dissent and so much disruption, and we're going to inspire Islamic revolutionaries in Central Asia to rebel within the Soviet Union. As Brzezinski said, we are going to light the soft underbelly of the Soviet Union on fire. I mean, and that is, and then to defend what they did, they make up these things about these things that, hard-nosed realists in Washington, D.C., as I like to describe. Oh, it makes total sense. The Soviets are going to invade Afghanistan and then move down and take over Iran. And those are the lies that are repeated. And that's how you end up here with people thinking that somehow this collapse that occurred in Afghanistan, where this Taliban victory, which is not the end of the war, I'm afraid it may just be the next phase of the war, is the consequence of Joe Biden pulling 2,500 troops out of a country the size of Texas.
Yeah.
I mean, does that make any sense to anybody? There's this thin red line of American GIs spread throughout Afghanistan, one every 12 miles, or something like that. And that was what was keeping the Taliban back. So, but it's that type of thinking, that type of willingness to go along with these narratives that if you take more than a second or two, maybe a minute or two, quickly unravel. And particularly if you have a good understanding of what came before, so all the things that occur in Afghanistan are because things occurred before, right? Or because, there are antecedents, just like anything else in history. But we tend not to focus on that, because I think we want to think that what is happening in the present, we are the masters of, that we are the agents of, and that we control that, when no, man, we're always just reacting to what the people did before us.
Yeah, and it's history, and people maybe think, well, that's just old history. Yeah, but it's the fact that we don't understand, we don't remember history, that we are where we are today. And I'm glad that you brought that up, because I wanted to kind of get in the Wayback Machine and go back to my own experience. I was on the news desk back in 1980. I was pulling wire copy and reading stories about the Soviet invasion in Afghanistan, and there was plenty of coverage at the time about our people chortling about the fact that the Soviets were so dumb they were going to get themselves involved in a quagmire just like our Vietnam. I mean, That was said repeatedly back then, that they knew that. And yet we went and did the same thing, which is unbelievable, and gets to this: are we too dumb, or are we in on it? Because I know back in the early 80s, we knew that. We seem to have forgotten somehow. And the other thing is that I wanted you to talk about Osama bin Laden's moving around in the shadows here back in the early 80s. He was our guy in this Soviet thing, right? And the Taliban, we talk about that as being, people think it's kind of figuratively speaking, that it was created by the United States, but it's almost literal. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, to begin with the Taliban, to a degree, the leadership of the Taliban comes out of the Mujahideen ranks that fought the Soviets, and these were the Mujahideen units that were Mujahideen groups that were supplied, trained, armed by the United States, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, etc. So yes, there is the connection may not be a very neat straight line, but no, they are. That's where, if you had no Mujahideen in Afghanistan, you would not have had the Taliban. It's very clear. And so Osama bin Laden, of course, is part of the Arab contingent that the United States and Saudi Arabia bring over to Afghanistan. This goes back to what I was saying earlier about the situation in 1978, 1979 throughout the greater Middle East, the Muslim world, where you had these Islamic revolutions. And one of those places is in Saudi Arabia, where the Saudi monarchy is existentially threatened by this. There is a real threat at the end of the 70s to the Saudi monarchy by these Islamic revolutionaries, for lack of a better term. And so one of the ideas that these guys come up with is that, okay, it'll be like a release valve on a boiler or something. We'll let these guys go and get off their Islamic revolutionary zeal. We're going to use them. We're going to control them. And we're gonna use them for our purposes against the Soviet Union, right? And again, I don't know. I might have spoken about this before with you, George, and so sorry if I'm repeating. But the lack of understanding of warfare, the hubris and the arrogance and the ignorance that dominates American policymaking, war policymaking in particular, which dominates American foreign policy, is incredible. That degree of hubris, arrogance, and ignorance. The Romans had a panoply of gods, like other cultures and did, to explain forces that were beyond human control. And Mars, the god of war, was one of the most powerful. He was one of the most important gods to the Romans, and certainly the most powerful. And to give you an example, if you were going to make a sacrifice to Mars, you had to sacrifice a bull, right? Biggest and strongest, most difficult animal you could possibly think of. That's who you had to sacrifice. If you made a sacrifice to Mercury, I don't know, you sacrifice a dove or something like that, right? I mean, like, you know what I mean? But that was the understanding the Romans had about war, because of all forces outside of the control of humans, war was the strongest. Because they recognize that human beings think they can control it, but they can't. And one of the things with the Romans, I think, that is a great parallel between Rome and the United States, is you will hear so many Americans say the United States has the world's greatest military, right? America has had the most respected institution in the United States is the U.S. military, by far, right? The fact that the United States military has not won a war in 75 years. And even the war that they get credit for, World War II, the Russians had everything to do, or mostly to do, with, particularly in Europe, and so this idea that the Romans somehow were this empire that was an empire whose military was never defeated, that they just conquest after conquest is wrong. The Romans had terrible military expeditions. They had invasions that were disasters. They had occupations that were disasters. They had campaigns where their entire forces were wiped out. People may not remember, everyone remembers Julius Caesar. They probably don't remember Marcus Crassus, who was one of the triumvirate that ruled Rome with Caesar for a while. Crassus decides that for his glory, so that he can, gain more power, that he will utilize the Roman army to attack the Parthians, right, for the glory of Rome for himself. He tries this. Entire force is decimated. They're completely wiped out. The Parthians execute Crassus by pouring liquid gold down his mouth, right? I mean, that's that story, right? That's where that comes from. If anyone remembers, and if anyone was a Game of Thrones fan, that happens to somebody in the first season, right? That's where that comes from. And the Romans understood that. And I don't think the American empire understands that you cannot control war. It is a force greater than man. It is unpredictable. And the consequences are things that you could never imagine. So here we are again, go back to 1978, 79, 1980. We're going to use these fired up Islamic revolutionaries against the Soviet Union. We bring them to Afghanistan. For everything I know, they really didn't do too much, because they get more credit than they deserve. But, what that does become is the core component of Al-Qaeda, right? And then, from that, this idea that we're going to control these people just proves completely illusory. We never had control of them probably in the first place. And if people think that happened 40 years ago, no, we're still doing it. In Syria, in when the Syrian civil war started, which the United States had a lot to do with the start of that war. I'm not going to say they're the only ones who started it, but they had a lot to do with it. The United States plan was to utilize these Sunni Islamist groups to help overthrow Assad. These groups, including Al Qaeda in Iraq and Al Qaeda, in general, Al Qaeda in Syria, I guess, as you could call them, I guess, for simplicity's sake. The United States literally thought, and they did this through the Turks, through the Saudis, through the Qataris. The United States thought that they could control these Islamist jihadist groups in Syria, basically make sure they only go west and attack Assad, and that they would not turn around and go east and cross the literal line in the sand that divides Syria and Iraq and attack Iraq. And of course, we saw what happened in 2013, 2014, where the Islamic State conquered most of the Sunni parts of Iraq. And the United States had to return to Iraq, and the United States, with Shia forces and Kurdish forces, destroyed nearly every city in the Sunni parts of Iraq along the Tigris and Euphrates River Valley. But the point being is that the United States thought that we could control these groups, just as we had thought we could control them in the past. We thought that war would be an instrument that we could use with our own will to create outcomes that we defined. And, that just is not what history tells us, and so I think my biggest fear right now with regards to Afghanistan is that there are so many of the warlords in Afghanistan allied themselves with the Taliban over these last weeks and months. Some did not. And some very important ones, men like Abdul Rashid Dostum, Mohammed Adenor, as well as the man who was Ashraf Ghani, the president, his first vice president, a guy named Amrullah Saleh. These men are either holed up in parts of Afghanistan that the Taliban have not taken yet, or they are outside the country. But these are men who are also not going to sit back and lose what they feel is theirs. These are warlords that controlled large regions and cities of the country for decades now. They also are drug lords, so they're losing their tens of millions, hundreds of millions, billions of dollars in income.
So you're counting that guy that was the first vice president of the current president in that warlord group?
Yes, Amrullah Saleh is not I don't believe you could classify him as a warlord per se, but he is right now in the Panjshir Valley, which is very significant in terms of the anti-Taliban resistance in the late 90s, as well as also in the Soviet Union's war there. The Panjshir Valley was always very significant. The Panjshir Valley, supposedly, the Soviet Union was never able to conquer. It's got that significance to it, right? So what you have now is this Amrullah Saleh declaring himself, because since the president, Ashraf Ghani, left with about, what the report I saw today, left with about $200 million in cash. Right?
Yeah. Pallets of $100 bills.
You can't make this stuff up, man.
Yeah.
And so Saleh, since he has said, according to the Afghan constitution, the president has left. I am now the legitimate president of the United States. Now, where this gets scary, away from the farcical and comical aspect about this, is that these men have long and strong ties with the American CIA, decades long, strong and long, right? And particularly these last 2 decades, where these men have, let's say a guy like Mohammed Adenor, he controlled the city of Mazar Sharif in the province of Balkh in the north. He was the biggest drug lord in the north of Afghanistan. He basically, he's a warlord. He had a fiefdom. The CIA was worked with him for decades now. Same with Dostum. Okay. Same. Amrullah Saleh used to head the NDS, which is the Afghan intelligence service, but they do both internal and external security stuff, mainly internal. But these are the people who torture everybody. That you have people here at Langley or other parts of the Washington, D.C. area who are looking at this right now in Afghanistan and saying, you know what? It's not much different right now in Afghanistan than it was on September 10th, 2001. The Taliban control most of the country. We have our warlords who are allied with us, are holed up and holding out in parts of the country. And I can guarantee you, George, these people are saying right now, we did it before. We can do it better this time.
Yeah.
Because they think that they can control things. Again, that hubris, that arrogance, that ignorance, that makes them incredible officers, makes them incredible officers of the empire because they're willing to think this way and they will do
Right.
anything, but it
Right.
makes them absolute fools and liars. And what that means, of course, for the Afghan people is the very real danger that we will use these warlords. The CIA, the American government will use these warlords to try and usurp the Taliban and, recreate 2001. But this time, of course, we know better. We're going to do it better, et cetera. Yeah.
Well, let's bring it into the present day. I mean, what I see going on, the Taliban, I think even you would be surprised at how quickly, I mean, my God, the way that they came back in over a weekend basically was just shocking to all observers.
George, it was shocking to the Taliban. They've made statements to that effect.
That they didn't even expect to come in that quickly. Yeah. So the question then is, there's this resurgence. Are we leaving? Are we coming? Are we going? What do you think is going to happen here?
Well, the nature of the war was shifting anyway for the United States, where the United States, and really for years had just really relied upon in terms of the United States conducting military operations against the Taliban, really doing that through the CIA, through special operations and through airstrikes, more and more of which are drones, while the troops that were there were, the conventional troops that were there were doing support for the Afghan army and government, supply, training, planning, things like that. So, you do have this scenario where the CIA and maybe the Pentagon will decide to back these warlords. You also have other issues at play here, whether or not the United States keeps its embassy open, which a lot of people are calling for that to happen. Because if you close the U.S. embassy, you shut off all hope for refugees to leave, shut off all hope for all the translators and other people who supported the United States over these years to leave. From everything I understand, from reporting from Kabul, from what I hear from my friends in Kabul, the Taliban are letting people go to the airport. They're trying to maintain control. So it's not like that catastrophe that occurred a couple of days ago where all those people were killed.
Yeah.
It controlled in the U.S. It controlled at the airport that the U.S. military was controlling. That's on us. That's on the United States. But does the U.S. keep the embassy open so that people can get out? The other part about too is the Taliban. You want it, you got it, right? It's really easy to be in the opposition, but then when you're in charge now, hey, what are you going to do? And the Taliban have some very real economic difficulties ahead of them. One of the things is they're taking over a country that has been destroyed by over 40 years of war. There's no infrastructure. There's nothing there. Their human capital is at a minimum because people who have the ability to get out have gotten out because there's been 40 plus years of war. So the Taliban are taking over a country that has been completely devastated. Afghanistan runs on two things: foreign assistance and poppies. Right now, about 90% or so, at least, of the Afghan government's operating budget comes from foreign assistance. And a significant amount, I can't remember the percentage off the top of my head, of the GDP is foreign assistance. So if the U.S. and the West go through with what they are claiming they may do, cut off all foreign assistance to Afghanistan, the Taliban have no money to do anything with. The other thing is, again, the only industry in Afghanistan, or nearly the only industry in Afghanistan, is the drug trade. The Afghanistan provides between 80 and 90% of the world's illicit opiates, and it includes an increasing amount of fentanyl as well. That is what millions of Afghans live off of. There are millions of Afghan farmers who live off of that, feed their families off of that. This is the only industry. And this is what the United States did. This is the legacy of the United States being in Afghanistan, is that there is no industry in Afghanistan. Afghanistan's government has no tax revenue, has no way to support itself besides foreign assistance, right? I mean, so the Taliban have declared that they are going to eradicate the drug trade in Afghanistan. This is one of the myths about Afghanistan, that the Taliban controlled the drug trade. That's one of the great lies and myths of Afghanistan. The Afghan government controlled the drug trade for these last 20 years, or up until recently when they started losing parts of the country. The Taliban certainly taxed the drug trade because they're an insurgency, so they're going to tax whatever is available to them. And primarily what was available to them, the tax was the drug trade. Now, were there Taliban involved in the drug trade? Undoubtedly, of course. But in terms of who were the drug lords, who were controlling this thing, who were the Pablo Escobars of Afghanistan, well, they were all Afghan government officials or warlords allied with the Afghan government, to include, when I was there, the biggest drug lord in southern Afghanistan, which made him the biggest drug lord in Afghanistan, which made him potentially one of the biggest drug lords in the world, at least for opiates, was Hamid Karzai, the president's half brother, Ahmed Wali Karzai. And he was the governor of Kandahar province, right, where the second largest city in Afghanistan is. Right. I mean, and he was the biggest. I mean, so that's what you're talking about. So the Taliban say they want to eradicate it. Well, what are you going to do then? How are you going to feed all these people? What are they going to live off of? Again, Afghanistan, the people, 70% of the population lives on less than $1 a day. Yeah, subsistence living. I mean, what are they going to? So if they lose their forward assistance, they lose the drug trade. What do they have? So they have some very real challenges in front of them. Even if you could wave a magic wand and make the American CIA and the warlords go away, and as well as too, most people in Afghanistan don't support the Taliban. But here's the thing: Taliban in recent years, and this has been growing over time, have been a better option for the Afghan people than the Afghan government, the United States, put in place and kept in place. Look, I mean, basically for 20 years, we've given the Afghan people two choices. You can either support the Taliban, which is a repressive theocratic government, or you can support this warlord government, which is a repressive kleptocracy. So what do you want to, who do you want to align yourself with? A bunch of religious fanatics or a bunch of warlords and drug lords who are war criminals?
Yeah,
I mean,
corrupt
the Afghans. Yeah.
Corrupt capitalists. Maybe their capitalism is a little more similar to our own, honest to God. And every time I hear you mention that $1 a day subsistence, I think, my God, we are bombing those people, and $1 a day, and have killed 80,000 innocent men, women, and children, making $1 a day, and maybe twice as many, depending upon the body count. Again, that is just shocking and staggering. Well, a lot of the news coverage that we're seeing coming out right now, ironically, is about the refugee crisis. And when we had you on Podcast by George a couple of weeks ago, you were talking about that. And the thing that I remember you saying was, we've had a lot of time to try to maybe not get this perfect, but get it a hell of a lot better than it is currently. But we didn't do it. And now nobody seems to know what to do.
That's exactly right. I mean, for more than 8 years, 8 years at least, U.S. veterans groups and human rights groups have been yelling about the refugees in Afghanistan, in particular, the men and women who worked with the United States over there. And the United States government has done nothing about it. All elements of the United States government, you can't just point fingers at Obama, Trump, or Biden. Department of Defense did nothing about it. State Department did nothing about it. Congress did nothing about it, or they did the bare minimum. You know how long? I mean, this is quite astounding how long it was taking the State Department to process a visa for somebody who worked for the United States in Afghanistan. It was taking them 880 days to process a visa for a man or a woman who had allied themselves with, offered their lives for the Americans in Afghanistan, and it was taking our State Department 880 days to process a visa for them.
Who we trusted with our lives. That's the other part about it.
That's exactly right. And these are the people who, they never betrayed us. And you've got, not only that, you've got all these people who've applied for these special immigrant visas. They have got Americans lined up who are supporting them, who are saying, like, I vouch for this guy, because many of these men and women in Afghanistan who worked for us didn't just work for us for 1 year. They worked for us for 5 years or 6 years or 7 years or 10 years, or maybe even 20 years now at this point. So they know literally hundreds of Americans who, military officers, diplomats, whoever, that would be willing and are vouching for them, saying, no, this guy is just like you said, George. No, are you kidding me? This guy saved my life one day in Afghanistan. Well, there's no way he's Taliban. There's no way he's Al Qaeda. But, so, I mean, the fact that they have done, but being upset about this, being upset about the way we're treating the translators and the other people who've worked with this, as well as other refugees, being upset about this means that somehow I am buying into the idea that the United States ever meant to help Afghans at all. Nothing. This was never about helping Afghans. This was never about making Afghans' life better. I tell you what, if a few crumbs fell off the table and some Afghans got them, all the better, right? Take a video of it and put it on CNN and describe it as a good news story, and we can use it for our war propaganda purposes. But there is not one thing. We used to call all the money we spent in Afghanistan, all the money we spent in Iraq doing this counterinsurgency, nation building stuff. The doctrine of the U.S. military, it's called money as a weapon system. That's what it's viewed as. It's money is viewed as a weapon. There is no purpose in the United States spending money over in these countries other than to achieve its political objectives. So the idea that somehow we had any desire to help the Afghan people, not talking about individuals. Lots of people went over there with great hearts, good morals, good intentions, but our institutions and our leaders, they never once cared about the Afghans.
We'll talk about that briefly because the military, what they do is they warmonger. I mean, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. I mean, that's what they do. They believe in it, wrongly so, and they think that they're right, and they brought us to where we're at today. Now, the media, their bailiwick is fear-mongering, and you're seeing a lot of this fear already on mainstream media about these refugees coming over to this country, thousands of them, hundreds of thousands. I mean, you can see these images, of hordes descending upon us in airplanes coming over here. And can they be trusted? How much of a danger do they pose to every single one, particularly on Fox, of these little old men and women that are watching Fox News? My God, they're terrifying them. How much fear, how much consideration do you think we should have for that? And how much of this quote unquote vetting should be done? And is it even realistic to do that?
I don't think it's realistic to do it, because if the Taliban or Al Qaeda wanted to put somebody into that system, that would make sure they put the right person in who would pass the vetting. Look, I mean, like for years now, the leading cause of death for American soldiers, particularly once American soldiers went into this mode of like, we're going to stay on the bases, we're just going to train, and they weren't going out and engaging in combat per se. Leading cause of death for American soldiers were being shot and killed by Afghan soldiers, the people they were training. And how did we, you have vetting for that, right? But the Taliban's not stupid. They know we have vetting. I mean, it's just like anything else. If you're going to do a bank heist or something, it kind of, I mean, like it's just, it's silly. It's silly. It's kind of like, not to get off on because I know you're a big privacy advocate too, George, and everything. And so not to get off into a tangent or change the subject, but it's kind of like Apple announcing that they're now going to scan the phones and put a backdoor into the cloud and everything to catch child pornographers. The idea that Apple is going to scan the cloud every day and look for child pornography. You know as well as I do, any self-respecting child pornographer is not putting his stuff up on the cloud, particularly after you announce that you're going to be looking for it, right? I mean, so the idea that and then the idea being is, if I don't even know if you could catch them anyway, even if they were doing that, because again, they're going to put people in that are going to pass the vetting, and I don't think there's any evidence that it's happened. I mean, how many Iraqis and Afghans have we brought over already? And I don't think there's been any incident. But again, I think it's, Donald Trump certainly wasn't going to help them. Barack Obama didn't do anything about it. And I think Joe Biden is terrified of that, terrified that the Republicans and centrist Democrats will attack him for doing this. And as a good friend of mine said about this when I was talking to her about it yesterday, and she said, I just don't understand. I don't understand how we can keep literally tens of thousands of people in cages on our border, right, including children, but we can't do anything to help these people. Like she just, the lack of humanity that we have in this country, the willingness to just debase people and to practice violence against them, whether we're caging people on our border or saying to people who worked with us in Afghanistan for however many years, maybe 20 years, no, too bad. We don't trust you,
and the situation, I guess, has to be discussed. And here's the way that I put it. And boy, that's kind of an old farmer way to look at it. But a lot of people are concerned about the feminist issue over there, the women that were finally maybe getting to go to school and have some experience of getting out from underneath the subjugation that's going on over there. And now that's all going to be lost, probably under Taliban rule. But the way that I put it to people, I say, that's a wonderful human right, but the ultimate human right is life.
Yes.
And we have killed, again, going back to those numbers that we started the show, 80,000 civilians, at least, maybe twice as many, depending on how you count. And a lot of those were women and children by what we did over there. So I look at it and say, yeah, maybe it will go back to the way that it was, and they'll have to wear the burqas, and maybe they won't be able to go to school, but maybe they won't get killed by a B-52 bomber.
Well, I mean, that's exactly right. For 20 years now, the biggest priority for most women in Afghanistan, or many women in Afghanistan, because the war wasn't present all throughout the country. But you have to remember that 75% of all people in Afghanistan live outside the cities. Most of the media coverage we see from Afghanistan comes from the cities, and almost all of it comes from one city, Kabul. So we're not getting a real accurate representation of Afghan life. So 75% of the people live outside the cities. For those who lived in the areas where the war has been occurring, you're absolutely right, George. The biggest concern for them every day has been getting killed by a roadside bomb from the Taliban, or a bomb drop from the sky by the Americans. And I shouldn't say killed. They're probably more concerned about their family and their children and their friends and their neighbors than they are themselves. But I mean, the idea that somehow life was better for women under this warlord government than under the Taliban, it's pretty suspect. Yes, there are women who have benefited. Most of those women live in certain neighborhoods in some cities, and they represent a wealthy part of the Afghan population. Not true for all. There have been plenty of women who have benefited, as well as men, from increased education, travel, etc. The expense of that, of course, the cost of that has been all the death and the war. But for women living under this warlord government, and let's remember the warlords that make up this government, they were the ones conducting the civil war. There's a lot of factual inaccuracy when we talk about Afghanistan. The Taliban did not bring the burqa to Kabul. Burqa is the head-to-toe covering, with the face covered as well. That people are very familiar. In Afghanistan, it's blue that they wear. The Taliban did not bring that to Kabul. By the time the Taliban took Kabul in 1996, the burqa had already been instituted for 2 years by the very same warlords that the U.S. had put in power in 2001. So the Afghan government may not have been as theatrical in its misogyny as the Taliban. The Taliban would execute women in stadiums. They would stone them in stadiums. But the reality is, for Afghan women, that under this warlord government, 4 out of 5 women in Afghanistan are forcibly married. Many of them as child brides, right? I mean, in Afghanistan, it is legal to rape your wife. And, and we could be here all day with at different things, but just to kind of round up that just little piece and give people some thought about what the heck has the U.S. been supporting in Afghanistan for all these years? Why have we been lied to about this? The biggest reason why Afghan women are in government-run prisons, and actually, I guess that maybe they've been released now, but maybe not. Who knows? Is because of moral crimes. The majority of women in prison in Afghanistan are in prison for moral crimes. And I mentioned this earlier, and someone didn't really understand what I was talking about. Moral crimes means that if you're a woman and you are raped, you are the one who gets put in jail. That is Afghan society. In the areas that I was in Afghanistan, other Marines and soldiers were in Afghanistan, it was not uncommon. You can ask, if you know veterans who are over there, if they were out in the rural areas, not in the cities, but out in the rural areas, again, where 75% of the population lives, it is not unheard of for a Marine and soldier to spend 8 months, 9 months, 12 months in Afghanistan and never see a woman, because they were kept. And these are in areas that are controlled by the United States and the Afghan government. You're talking about the culture. It is a misogynistic culture. The Taliban are one representation of that. The warlords another representation of it. But this great lie that the United States has been over there helping women. Again, some have benefited, but the vast majority have not. They live under rules similar to what the Taliban have put in place, and they are in danger of being killed. And, it's just one great lie. And there are so many others about this, but I think that's the most pertinent because we hear so much about it right now. And, it's also too, it goes to show about the conversation we have in this country about these wars, about Afghanistan, about anything, right? It's like, so according to what I hear on MSNBC or something like that, there are only two options for Afghanistan: bomb them or abandon them, right? I mean, we have this binary approach to everything that's dominated by violence-based solutions. Yeah, it is. The tragedy for Afghan women is just, in any other metric you want to trot out, the suicides of women, maternal health care, death rates, it is astronomical, and it is horrifying.
Well, we spent a long time on this today, but the live stream gives me an opportunity to do that on the live line. One thing I do want to say that, again, you're going to have the fear mongers out there talking about the resettlement here. You're also going to have these deficit hawks. Now they're going to come out of the woodwork and talk about all of the expense associated with this. Nobody ever talks about that when it comes to the war, the political candidates last time around. I think Tulsi Gabbard was the only one that brought it up. But I saw an interesting statistic that 1 year of the Afghan war funding could resettle 1.2 million refugees. And Matt, are they all coming to the United States? Are they going to go to our allies? Allies had roles in this. Are they going to be moving into this country or other places as well?
A lot of our European allies have a lot of political pressure to not accept refugees as well. They're a lot of our European friends, and not so much because they're xenophobic, right, or because there's a racist element involved, or but because they have been absorbing refugees for a long time now. Because of these wars, the refugees have been, whether they be Iraqi, Syrian, Afghan, what have you, they have been going to Europe, and I'm sure people are very familiar with that. Yeah. Before the United States helped destroy Libya in 2011, there were hardly any refugees or migrants coming from North Africa. And now, what do we see? We see thousands of migrants trying to flee Libya from the hellhole that the United States helped create there. By boat. Thousands of them die every year trying to cross the Mediterranean, and then they end up in Italy or Greece or wherever, and they're not welcome, for a variety of reasons. One, because so many of them already showed up. So I think, some of them have been coming here. Some of the people who have worked with us, they've gone to a military base in Virginia, and then they are supposed to be going to military bases in Texas, where I guess they are, sorted out or whatever, or continue to be vetted. The idea was at some point they would go to third country locations. I'm not really sure how that is panning out, but the one of the issues too right now is nobody is leaving Afghanistan, or very few are leaving, because the U.S. military has shut down the airport and only allows military flights. So most of the people who had visas to get out had them on commercial flights. And now they're kind of stuck in a limbo. And yes, the U.S. military is evacuating people, but it's only evacuating people when there's an empty plane, when they don't have our own people to put on it. So, I mean, what we can do to help people is so far removed for what we actually are doing, even though there are those, whether they be the apologists for war or government or media, who are putting out this narrative that somehow our occupation, our presence there has been benevolent, when it has been the exact opposite.
Well, as we wrap up here, I want to cite a quote from the great Medea Benjamin of Code Pink. Now, this was something she put on Twitter, and it leads to my final question for you, Matt. And it reads that as the blame game for the Afghan crisis heats up, and that's what we're talking about here. I mean, there's plenty of finger pointing to go around here, folks. She says, I want to add all who supported this disastrous invasion from the beginning, including those who bashed us at anti-war protests. We were right. You were wrong. We should have never invaded Afghanistan, period. And that leading to the question for you, and I mentioned the fact that you made world news, really, when you resigned from your post and you got involved in the media and this cause that you're still involved in today, Matt. Where we are right now in Afghanistan, is that why you resigned and stepped aside and discussed back in 2009?
Yeah, it's got a great deal to do with it. I think I was just reminded of what I said in my resignation letter. I was more concerned about why we're there and the purposes of it. But I had this is exactly what I thought would happen. This is exactly what other people thought would happen. This is what our intelligence agencies said would happen, that we are just by escalating the war, we are driving people to support the insurgency because we are pursuing this divide and conquer strategy. So when you're on the wrong side of that, who are you going to turn to? You're going to turn to the Taliban, particularly when you do use a divide and conquer strategy that focuses on ethnicity. So very similar to like what we did in Iraq, right? Where we pitted the Shia versus the Sunni versus the Kurds. The Sunnis had nowhere to go. So who did they turn to? They turned to these insurgent groups. They turned to groups like Al-Qaeda. So in Afghanistan, the same thing. And then we, decided that because we're hard-nosed realists, as these people like to describe themselves, we are going to use warlords and drug lords, and it will work. We can control it. It will work out because we are inherently good. That whole American exceptionalism crap, this will work out. I mean, that is honestly, I hope people don't think I'm exaggerating, but that is a type of magical thinking that occurs in Washington, D.C. Because what happens is you get people at the top. You have a system that incentivizes. Look, I was just describing this the other day. General Petraeus, who was in command of an army unit in Mosul, Iraq in 2003, 2004, he leaves. The unit that comes in basically discovers they've been lying. Mosul wasn't in a good condition at all. And Mosul is a very difficult, violent place. Petraeus was lying about it, cooking the numbers on it. Petraeus becomes in charge of the training command for Iraq, loses 300 or 400,000 rifles and pistols, just gone, as well as he is overseeing the Shia security forces that are really Shia death squads that are beginning this genocidal civil war in Iraq. I mean, the man is a complete failure. What does he do? He writes an op-ed in October 2004, saying how the war needs to be won. It doesn't say President Bush's name, but you can't read that without reading this as an election endorsement by a general in Iraq. What happens? Does he get disciplined for it? Does he get fired because he sucks as a general? No, he gets promoted and he becomes a celebrity general. Who do you think fill up the ranks behind him? Those exact type of people. So either, like you say, George, and I've been saying this, I've been plagiarizing you. Either they're too dumb or they're in on it. Yeah. Right. So that's the reality of the American military leadership and civilian leadership these last 20 years in all these wars is either they're stupid or they are craven and they are willing to, for institutional and personal gains, continue these wars. That's it. Either they're stupid or they're greedy. That's it. Yeah.
Well, that's a good ending point. That's a place to stop. And I always encourage people, if you want to see that, where I came up with that saying, actually, the movie Casino with Robert De Niro, go check it out. There's a clip on YouTube, and just search Momo, because that's what he calls this guy. I mean, it's kind of funny, but in this particular instance, it isn't. Just give us a last thought here, Matt, as we leave. Tell people what they should be looking at most closely now, maybe even a source of information, because like I said, a lot of this is going to be scaremongering at this point about the refugees. I think that's going to be a lot of the news coverage, but what are you looking for coming out of Afghanistan, and where do you think this is going to land? Where are we headed?
In terms of information, I have been really impressed by the coverage Al Jazeera English is doing on this. They are doing fantastic coverage, I believe. Their correspondents, Rob McBride and Charlotte Bellis. Charlotte Bellis was the first person the Taliban called upon in their press conference yesterday. She is walking around in Kabul wearing pretty much the same clothes she would have worn normally, and she has basically thrown a scarf over her head that barely covers her head, as opposed to some of the more theatrical reporters you see on CNN who are really. It's like somebody sent me the video of this. You remember a bunch of years ago that news reporter, that weather reporter who got caught faking the wind for the hurricane, like he was leaning.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, the wind was blowing him over. And in the background, a couple of people walking around eating ice cream cones. Whatever. It's like that type of thing, right? I mean, so Al Jazeera English You know, and in terms of check out the work that Code Pink is doing. Please go to Code Pink's website. They have a number of they list a number of ways that you can help. And then another organization I suggest is an organization called RAWA, with RAWA, which stands for the Revolutionary Association of Women in Afghanistan. These are the people who have been saying all along, women in Afghanistan have three enemies: the Taliban, the warlords, and the United States. And that, they have been consistent about that. They have been clear, and they have been absolutely right. So please go to, you know, Revolutionary Association of Women in Afghanistan, RAWA. They have ways that you can help support women in Afghanistan, as well as refugees. And I will leave it at that.
And thank you once again, folks. He's a friend of Podcast by George. You'll see him again on very soon, because unfortunately this is going to be an ongoing story, and it's not going to get any better anytime soon, folks. That's Matthew Ho on the Podcast by George live line. And if you enjoy this, if you like Podcast by George, you've seen the little chyron, they call it, the little scroll along the bottom of the screen. Please like us and follow us on Facebook, subscribe to us on YouTube. Go to iTunes and you can subscribe there, get the audio only versions. You can get those just about anywhere that podcasts are heard: Spotify, the iHeartRadio app, even Amazon Prime Audio carries podcast. I don't know why. They just do. They picked it up somehow, but you can get Podcast by George on Amazon. Let's say goodbye for now. Thanks again, Matt.
Thank you, George.
And folks, that's all there is. And there ain't no more. That's another Podcast by George.